80%. That is the chilling surge in fatalities that turned Lake Michigan into America's deadliest body of water in recent seasons. In 2024 alone, 85 souls were claimed by the Great Lakes, with nearly half of them swallowed by the Michigan Triangle. As we move through 2025, the numbers are already eclipsing records. This isn't a vacation spot. It's a 22,000 square mile liquid trap. But behind those cold statistics lies an even more brutal reality mysteries that modern science has yet to name. How could the captain of the O.S. McFarland vanish into thin air from a cabin bolted shut from the inside, like a magician performing a final act amidst the fog? And why did Flight 2501 and its 58 souls simply evaporate without a trace, even though the lake at the crash site is only 200 feet deep, a depth that should have surrendered every secret? Is this merely a fatal glitch in nature, or do these waters conceal a physical blind spot, a rift in space-time that we were never meant to reach? Today, we set aside the standard warnings to dive into an investigation of 4 tragedies that defy every law of physics ever written. Stay with us until the very last second, because the secret lies not just in what went missing, but in what is still silently existing beneath the waves. Do you have the courage to look into the heart of the darkness, or will you be forever lost within the deadly triangle? There are ships born under a dark star destined from their very first planks to become magnets for misfortune. The Roosevelt was such a vessel. Her story began on April the 12th, 1863 at the Leander H. Bull Shipyard in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. She was a 106-foot two-masted wooden schooner weighing 115 tons, a sturdy, unassuming workhorse typical of the Great Lakes industrial boom. She was built for utility, designed to haul lumber and agricultural produce across the cold, unforgiving inland seas. Yet, while her design was standard, her luck was anything but. The bloodletting began almost immediately. In August 1865, only 2 years after her launch, the Roosevelt encountered a freak squall near Grand Haven, Michigan. The storm appeared with a sudden, violent ferocity that was uncharacteristic even for the volatile Lake Michigan. The schooner was battered so relentlessly that she was driven aground her hull, grinding into the sand. While the crew miraculously survived the wreck itself, the ship claimed its first sacrifice in a brutal fashion. As the vessel struck the shore, the shock caused a mass of mast spars and heavy rigging to collapse. Captain Peterson was caught directly beneath the falling debris. The impact inflicted a catastrophic head injury, and despite his crew's efforts, he succumbed to his wounds shortly after. Though the Roosevelt was eventually salvaged, repaired, and returned to service, a dark reputation began to settle over her wooden frame, a whisper among sailors that this ship was cursed. Over the next 5 decades, the Roosevelt lived a double life. To the ledger books, she was a successful merchant vessel. To the sailors who manned her, she was a disaster waiting to happen. She passed through numerous owners, surviving several collisions and groundings that should have sent an older ship to the scrapyard. By 1919, now an aging relic of a bygone era of sail, she was purchased by a reclusive religious commune based on High Island. This community, a splinter group of the House of David, depended on the Roosevelt to transport their primary commodities, potatoes, and highly coveted bird's-eye maple lumber. For 2 years, the ship performed her duties without major incident, but the calm was merely the prelude to her final, most terrifying act. In October 1921, the Roosevelt was docked at High Island, laden with cargo and prepared for a routine voyage to Benton Harbor. The ship's regular pilot was Brother Ed Johnson, a man whose life was intertwined with the rhythms of Lake Michigan. He was no stranger to the lake's dangers, yet on the day of departure, Johnson did something that shocked his peers. He refused to board the ship. He wasn't ill, nor was there a visible storm on the horizon. Instead, Johnson claimed he had been seized by a vivid, terrifying premonition. He described a heavy, suffocating sense of death surrounding the vessel, an intuitive certainty that if the Roosevelt sailed, she would never return. Despite the economic pressure from the commune to deliver the lumber, Johnson stood firm. His refusal forced the owners to hire an outsider captain, Erhard Gliese, to take the helm. As the Roosevelt cast off, Johnson stood on the docks watching the ship vanish into a low, creeping fog. Convinced he was looking at a funeral pyre, Captain Gliese sailed with a crew and a group of passengers whose exact number remains a subject of historical debate. Due to the commune's informal record-keeping estimates of the souls on board vary wildly from 9 to as many as 28. What followed was a week of eerie atmospheric stillness. The lake was uncharacteristically calm, wrapped in a persistent thick mist that muffled sound and obscured the sun. On October 31st, 1921, Halloween, this silence was broken by a horrific discovery. The car ferry Ann Arbor, number 4, navigating 15 miles east of Kenosha, Wisconsin, spotted a dark rectangular shape bobbing in the swells. It was the Roosevelt, but not as she had left the docks. She was completely overturned, her white-painted hull gleaming like a bone in the gray light. When investigators reached the wreck, the mystery only deepened. The Roosevelt had not simply capsized, she had been mangled. Her stern was shattered, the heavy timber splintered, as if by a massive concentrated force. The immediate assumption by the Coast Guard was a collision. In the thick fog, a large steel steamer must have struck the wooden schooner, perhaps unknowingly, and sent her reeling. However, this theory quickly crumbled under forensic scrutiny. First, a collision that could shatter a schooner's stern would inevitably leave significant damage on the bow of the striking vessel. Yet, after weeks of checking every port from Duluth to Buffalo, not a single steamer reported a collision or showed a single scratch on its hull. No ship reported rescuing survivors, and no one reported seeing the Roosevelt after she entered the fog. Furthermore, the state of the ship's safety equipment presented a chilling paradox. The Roosevelt's lifeboat was found floating nearby. It was not smashed or dragged down with the ship. Instead, it was found upright and empty, drifting as if it had been set loose rather than launched in an emergency. If the crew had time to release the boat, why was it empty? If the collision was sudden, how did the boat escape undamaged? When the U.S. revenue cutter Tuscarora arrived to search for remains, they found nothing. Not a single body, not a shred of clothing, and no personal effects were ever recovered from the water or the air pockets within the hull. The forensic analysis conducted at Racine Harbor, where the wreck was eventually towed, only added more questions. The damage to the stern was inconsistent with a standard maritime collision. A collision usually involves a glancing blow or a direct T-bone strike that leaves a clear trail of impact. The Roosevelt's stern looked as though it had been crushed by an immense pressure or struck by something that left no physical traces of itself. This leads us to the heart of the Michigan Triangle enigma. If there was no other ship what shattered the Roosevelt, was she a victim of a phantom collision, an encounter with a localized atmospheric anomaly, or a rogue wave that science of the 1920s could not quantify? Or did Brother Ed Johnson's premonition tap into a darker reality of the lake, a place where time and matter behave differently? The Roosevelt had survived the treacherous Great Lakes for 58 years, enduring some of the worst storms in recorded history, only to be destroyed in a sea so calm that it didn't even leave a ripple on the shore. To this day, the fate of those 28 souls remains a ghost story, a reminder that on Lake Michigan, the most dangerous storms are sometimes the ones you never see coming. Next, the story of the tugboat Admiral and its faithful consort, the barge. Klevko is not merely a tale of a shipwreck. It is a sprawling saga of technical failure, psychological collapse, and a dual vanishing that remains one of the most haunting chapters in the history of the Great Lakes. A tragedy forged by the industrial demands of World War II and the brutal, unforgiving weight of a Lake Erie winter. The Klevko was a vessel born of the industrial age, a crude steel barge built in 1913 by the American Shipbuilding Company in Lorain, Ohio. For 29 years, she had been a reliable workhorse, navigating the treacherous waters of Lake Erie to transport crude oil and refined petroleum products to the refineries lining the shores of Northwest Ohio. By 1942, she was a veteran of the lakes, but the demands of the war effort meant there was no rest for aging vessels. On December 1st, 1942, the Klevko was heavily laden with over 1 million gallons of fuel oil, prepared for a journey from Toledo, Ohio to her home port in Cleveland. Her guardian for this voyage was the Admiral, a powerful 95-foot steel tugboat with a crew of 14 men. On the Klevko, 18 officers and crew members stood watch. In total, 32 souls set out that day, unknowingly sailing directly into a meteorological death trap. As the pair navigated the Paley Passage in western Lake Erie, the weather began to turn with a sudden, violent ferocity. They were struck by what locals call a black blizzard, a lethal cocktail of sub-zero temperatures, gale force winds, and lake effect snow that reduces visibility to zero and transforms the water into a chaotic landscape of white foam and black ice. The Admiral struggled at the front, her engines straining against 20-foot waves, while the Klevko trailed several hundred feet behind at the end of a heavy steel tow line. In such conditions, the relationship between a tug and its tow is a delicate dance of physics. If the line is too slack, the barge can wander. If it is too tight, the vessels can jerk each other into disaster. The nightmare reached its breaking point in the early hours of December 2nd. Only a few miles from the safety of the Cleveland harbor, the crew of the Klevko felt a sickening sudden change in the tension of the cable. Through the blinding, swirling snow, the lights of the Admiral, their only link to survival, simply vanished. There was no explosion, no frantic distress signal over the radio, and no slow founder. It was as if the lake had opened a mouth and swallowed the tugboat whole. Modern maritime forensics suggests that as the massive oil-heavy Klevko surged forward on a giant wave, while the Admiral was trapped in a deep trough, the tow line acted like a giant tether. It tripped the tugboat, flipping the 95-foot steel vessel over in a matter of seconds. Within moments, the 14 men on the Admiral were entombed in a steel coffin, plunging into the abyss before they could even grasp that the cable had snapped. Now, the 18 men on the Klevko found themselves in a living purgatory. The barge had no engine of its own. It was a drifting steel island anchored to the lake floor by the weight of the sunken Admiral, which was still attached to the other end of the tow line. The captain of the Klevko managed to establish radio contact with the Coast Guard in Ohio, reporting the loss of the tug and pleading for assistance. Search planes were scrambled, and for a brief, flickering moment during the daylight hours of December 2nd, a pilot spotted the barge through a break in the clouds. He dropped flares to mark her position, but the rescue was hindered by a phenomenon known in maritime psychology as total disorientation. The crew of the Clevico, trapped in a world of white snow and gray water, had lost all sense of direction. Despite being just miles from the coast, they were functionally lost in a void. As the blizzard intensified, the Coast Guard cutters found it impossible to reach the barge. The winds surged from the west and the buildup of lake-effect ice began to weigh down the Clevico. It is believed that in a desperate attempt to regain mobility, the crew eventually cut the tow line, freeing themselves from the sunken Admiral, but leaving them to drift at the mercy of the gale. Brief, frantic radio transmissions continued, but they conveyed little information other than the fact that the barge was taking on water and the end was near. Then, the radio went silent. On December 3rd, the grim reality was revealed. The Clevico had foundered, taking all 18 souls with her. The bodies of about half the crew were found floating off Euclid, Ohio, frozen in their life jackets. The aftermath of the tragedy brought a long-standing legal battle. The owners, Cleveland Tankers, were eventually held partially liable for the loss of life. Investigators proved that the tug and barge were fundamentally unseaworthy for the extreme conditions of December 1942. But the story did not end with the legal rulings. The Clevico, still filled with over 1 million gallons of fuel oil, became a ticking ecological time bomb on the lake floor. It wasn't until a partially successful salvage operation in 1961 that the vessel was righted and some oil removed. However, she was sunk again off Cleveland with 165,000 gallons still on board. It took a second major operation in 1995 to finally remove the remaining oil and seal the tanks, turning the wreck from a hazardous waste site into a haunting destination for experienced technical divers. The Admiral was eventually located in 1967, sitting upright in 150 feet of water with the tow line still attached, a silent confirmation of the sudden vertical nature of its demise. Analyzing this disaster through the lens of the Michigan Triangle reveals a terrifying truth. The human element is often the first thing to break. When the Admiral vanished, the men on the Clevico suffered from sensory deprivation. In an environment where every direction looks like a wall of white, the mind loses its ability to calculate distance, time, or safety. They weren't just alone. They were psychologically adrift. Their story remains a staggering reminder that on these inland seas, a steel cable is no match for a winter gale, and once that line is cut, the transition from a modern vessel to a ghost ship happens in the blink of an eye. The third investigation into the heart of the Michigan Triangle shifts our focus from the mangled wreckage of steel and the roar of winter gales to a mystery that is far more intimate, far more silent, and infinitely more disturbing. While the previous tragedies were defined by the destructive power of the Great Lakes, this event centers on a singular, impossible vanishing that has become the definitive locked room mystery of the maritime world. This is the story of Captain George R. Donner. The setting was April 1937, a time when the Great Lakes were tentatively shaking off the icy grip of a particularly brutal winter. Captain George R. Donner was a highly respected 58-year-old veteran of the inland seas, a man whose reputation was built on decades of disciplined service and an unwavering steadiness under pressure. At the time, he was at the helm of the O.S. McFarland, a massive 540-foot coal freighter that represented the pinnacle of industrial naval engineering of the era. The ship's mission was a routine but grueling one, transporting a heavy load of coal from Erie, Pennsylvania, across the length of the lakes to Port Washington, Wisconsin. For several days, Donner had led his crew through a relentless battle against the remnants of the winter pack ice. He had spent nearly 48 hours on the bridge, with almost no sleep navigating the treacherous ice-choked bottleneck of the Straits of Mackinac. This task required hypervigilance, as a single miscalculation against the jagged ice floes could pierce the steel hull of even a vessel as large as the McFarland. By the evening of April 28, 1937, the McFarland had finally cleared the hazardous ice fields and turned southward into the relatively calmer open waters of northern Lake Michigan. Exhausted by the mental and physical toll of the passage, but satisfied that the most dangerous leg of the journey was behind them, Captain Donner decided it was time to rest. He turned the watch over to his second mate with a final specific instruction that was common among captains, but would later take on a prophetic weight: "Wake me up when we get close to the destination." At approximately 10:30 p.m., the captain walked to his private quarters, stepped inside, and closed the heavy wooden door. This was the last time George R. Donner was ever seen by another human being. The mystery began to unfold at 1:15 a.m. on April 29th. As the McFarland neared its destination at Port Washington, the second mate, true to his orders, went to the captain's cabin to wake him. He knocked firmly on the door. There was no response. He knocked again, louder this time, calling out the captain's name. The only sound that met him was the steady, rhythmic thrum of the ship's engines. Sensing that something was seriously wrong, perhaps a stroke or a heart attack brought on by the captain's extreme exhaustion, the mate attempted to open the door. It would not budge. The heavy door was bolted firmly from the inside. Alarmed, the mate summoned several crew members, and together, using heavy tools, they eventually splintered the door frame and forced their way into the room. What they found inside was a scene that haunts maritime investigators and forensic analysts. To this day, the cabin was a portrait of undisturbed domesticity. The captain's bed was neatly made, the linens appearing crisp and flat, as if no one had ever laid down to rest. His uniform was hung up carefully on a hanger, and his shoes sat precisely side by side on the floor, where he had presumably stepped out of them. His pipe and tobacco were on the desk. There was no sign of a struggle, no blood, and no evidence of a robbery. Most importantly, the cabin was a steel box with only two potential exits: the door, which had been locked and bolted from the inside, and the portholes. However, the portholes on the McFarland were a mere 15 inches in diameter. Captain Donner was a man of substantial, sturdy build. It was a physical impossibility for him to have squeezed his body through such a small opening, even if he had been motivated to do so. The crew immediately initiated an emergency search protocol, but the inherent illogic of the situation hung over them like a shroud. They scoured every inch of the 540-foot freighter. They searched the engine rooms, the massive coal bunkers, the galley, and the lifeboats. They peered into every dark corner and storage locker, but on a ship of that size, there was nowhere a man could hide or be hidden without eventually being discovered. Furthermore, the conditions of the lake that night added another layer of impossibility. The water was described by the lookouts as glassy and calm. In the silence of such a still night, the splash of a 200-pound man hitting the water would have been audible to anyone on deck, yet no one had heard a thing. When the McFarland reached port, the authorities took over the investigation. They performed an exhaustive forensic sweep of the cabin, searching for any hidden panels or mechanical secret exits, but the ship's architecture provided no such loopholes. There was no suicide note and no indication that the captain was suffering from any mental distress. In fact, his career was at its peak. He had simply evaporated. The transition from a living, breathing human being to a total absence occurred in a span of less than 3 hours within a sealed room in the middle of a calm lake. Analyzing the vanishing of George R. Donner through the lens of the Michigan Triangle reveals a phenomenon that goes beyond mere maritime accidents. This was a locked room paradox that defies the laws of matter. Skeptics have proposed various theories ranging from the captain somehow finding a way to sneak out past the crew to the far-fetched idea of a secret stowaway, but none account for the internal bolt on the door or the pristine condition of the bed. In maritime psychology, this case is often cited as the ultimate glitch in the reality of the Great Lakes. It suggests that in certain blind spots of the triangle, the boundary between presence and absence becomes porous. Captain Donner's disappearance remains a chilling reminder that sometimes the lake doesn't need a storm to claim a soul. It can reach inside the most secure, bolted-down sanctuary and pull a man into the void, leaving behind nothing but a locked door and a question that can never be answered. The chronicles of the Michigan Triangle often focus on the depths below, where mangled steel and broken masts lie in silent repose. However, on the night of June 23, 1950, the anomaly reached upward, claiming a victim from the sky in a tragedy that would become the deadliest commercial aviation disaster in American history up to that point. The disappearance of Northwest Orient Airlines Flight 2501 remains to this day a profound forensic enigma that defies the traditional laws of physics and wreckage recovery. It occurred during a pivotal moment in American culture, a Friday night in the early 1950s, when the nation was on the cusp of the Korean War, and the domestic airwaves were filled with the smooth crooning of Nat King Cole and Doris Day. While American families were beginning to embrace the novelty of television, 58 souls were about to enter a void from which no metal or bone would ever fully return. Flight 2501 was operated by a Douglas DC-4, a robust four-engine propliner with a storied pedigree. Originally built in Chicago in 1943 as a C-54 military transport for the U.S. Army Air Forces, this specific aircraft serial number 1027 tail number N-95425 had been a workhorse of World War II before being converted for commercial use. The DC-4 was the quintessential unstoppable machine of its era, powered by 4 Pratt & Whitney R 2000 Wasp piston engines, each capable of generating 1,450 horsepower. On this fateful evening, the aircraft was departing from New York's LaGuardia Airport bound for Seattle with a scheduled stop in Minneapolis. It carried 2,500 gallons of fuel and 490 pounds of cargo. With 55 passengers, including 27 women, 22 men and 6 children, and a crew of 3, the total weight was calculated at 71,342 pounds, remarkably close to its maximum allowable takeoff limit. At the helm was Captain Robert C. Lind, a 35-year-old veteran from Hopkins, Minnesota, who had been flying for Northwest since 1941. Lind was the embodiment of the professional aviator. He had logged over 200 hours specifically on the DC-4 and had completed 15 round trips on this exact route in the 3 months prior. Beside him was First Officer Vern F. Wolf, also 35, and serving the passengers was 25-year-old flight attendant Bonnie Ann Feldman. As they cleared Cleveland, Ohio, and headed west toward the heart of the Michigan Triangle, the atmosphere began to shift. A massive, roiling squall line, a wall of severe thunderstorms, was materializing over Lake Michigan, crackling with the kind of static-charged electricity that had heralded so many maritime disappearances in the decades prior. At 11:51 p.m. Eastern Time, as Flight 2-501 cruised at 3,500 feet near Battle Creek, Michigan, Captain Lind radioed the Northwest Control Center in Chicago. His voice was steady, reporting that he estimated reaching Milwaukee by 11:37 p.m. Central Time. However, as the aircraft approached the shoreline of Lake Michigan, the weather turned violent. Seeking to escape the severe turbulence and the battering of the black blizzard conditions that often plagued the lake, Lind made his final request to the Civil Aeronautics Authority, CAA. At 12:13 a.m., he asked for permission to descend from 3,500 feet to 2,500 feet. In a decision that would haunt aviation historians, the CAA denied the request. Other aircraft were operating at lower altitudes, and the standard 1,000-foot vertical separation was deemed necessary despite the chaos of the storm. Lind acknowledged the denial. It was the last transmission ever received. Moments later, the DC-4, a 50,000-pound machine of steel and aluminum, simply blinked out of existence. It did not fade. It did not signal a mayday. It did not report an engine failure. It vanished from the radar screens as if a giant hand had reached out of the clouds and plucked it from the sky. By 5:30 a.m. on Saturday, June 24th, the aircraft was officially declared missing as its fuel reserves would have been exhausted. What followed was the largest search and rescue operation in the history of the Great Lakes. The U.S. Navy, the Coast Guard, and state police from 4 states converged on the water. Given the massive size of the DC-4, investigators expected to find floating wings, large sections of the fuselage, or at least substantial debris. Instead, they found a forensic nightmare. The Coast Guard cutter Woodbine located an oil slick and a scattering of debris several miles off the coast of Benton Harbor. But the debris was not what anyone expected. There were no large chunks of metal. Instead, the surface was littered with thousands of tiny fragments, seat cushions, pieces of cabin lining, blankets, and personal items like a boy's trousers or a man's wallet. Most disturbingly, the human remains recovered were so pulverized that authorities were shocked. Captain Nathaniel Fulford of the Coast Guard remarked that no piece of the wreck was larger than the palm of your hand. The impact, or the event, had been so violent that it had essentially atomized the passengers and the aircraft. Despite the discovery of these light floating fragments, the heavy components of the plane, the 4 massive Pratt & Whitney engines, the landing gear, and the primary structural fuselage have never been found. For decades, the lake floor has been scoured with side-scan sonar and advanced submersibles by organizations like the Michigan Shipwreck Research Associates, MSRA, and renowned explorer Clive Cussler's NUMA. They found nothing but an empty, silty bottom. It is as if the lake didn't just sink the plane. It swallowed the metal while rejecting the cloth and the flesh. What truly pushes the case of Flight 2501 into the realm of the Michigan Triangle's supernatural lore are the eyewitness accounts from that night. While the plane was disappearing from radar residents near Glen, Michigan, were watching the sky. William Bowie, a local gas station owner, along with 9 other witnesses, reported seeing the plane flying unusually low. They described the engine sounding like a racing car with a blown gasket. Suddenly, they witnessed a terrifying anomaly, a bright yellow-orange flash that lit up the sky like the sun setting. This flash was not lightning. It was a localized, brilliant orb of light that lingered for a second before the aircraft vanished into the darkness of the lake. Forensic theorists from the Douglas Aircraft Company later speculated that the plane might have been flipped by a sudden violent downdraft, a phenomenon known to occur in the triangle, causing it to dive vertically into the water at terminal velocity. Because they were only at 3,500 feet, the pilots would have had no time to recover. Yet, this does not explain why the heavy engines and fuselage remain missing, despite being located in a relatively concentrated search area of only 500 square miles. When we synthesize the data, the locked room nature of the Vanishing, the disintegrated remains, the missing heavy metal, and the unidentified lights, a chilling picture of the triangle's atmospheric power emerges. Whether it was a mechanical failure exacerbated by a glitch in the magnetic field or an encounter with an unidentified atmospheric phenomenon, Flight 2-501 remains the skyward peak of the Michigan Triangle's dark legend. It serves as a reminder that in this region, the void doesn't just wait in the depths. It watches from the clouds, ready to claim the most robust machines of man and leave behind nothing but a handful of dust and a legacy of silence. My dear friends, as we draw the veil over these 4 investigations, we are forced to confront a terrifying continuity that spans over a century of maritime and aviation history. The Lake Michigan Triangle is not merely a collection of isolated accidents. It is a tapestry of the impossible. We have traced a haunting line from the vanishing of wooden sailing vessels like the Roosevelt II to the mid-20th century steel giants. We saw the Admiral and the Clevico, 2 massive vessels swallowed in a ghostly double disappearance in 1942, leaving behind a trail of oil, but no survivors. We stood inside the chilling locked room paradox of 1937, where Captain George R. Donner evaporated from a bolted cabin on the O.S. McFarland without disturbing a single bedsheet. And finally, we looked to the clouds in 1950, where Northwest Orient, Flight 2-501, and its 58 souls were atomized into thousands of fragments, while its heavy engines vanished into the silty void. How do we reconcile these events? If we look at the data objectively, 2 competing narratives emerge. On one hand, there is the scientific rationality of the Great Lakes. Meteorologically, Lake Michigan is a convergence zone for some of the most extreme atmospheric conditions in North America. The black blizzards. Sudden microbursts and unpredictable seiches can exert thousands of pounds of pressure per square foot, enough to snap a ship's spine or flip a DC-4 in midair. The lake's unique thermal layers can also create superior mirages, distorting distance and horizon, leading even veteran captains like Donner or Lind into fatal errors of perception. On the other hand, we must address the magnetic and forensic anomalies. For decades, pilots and mariners have reported magnetic spin, localized compass failures, and electronic dead zones that suggest a profound disturbance in the Earth's crust beneath the lake. Could there be a localized magnetic vortex, a glitch in the matrix that disrupts the very molecular stability of objects within its reach? The fact that heavy wreckage, such as the engines of Flight 2501 or the hull of the Admiral, remains missing. Despite modern sonar suggests that the lake floor may be more than just a graveyard, it may be a vault that refuses to be opened. The Michigan Triangle remains a place where the boundary between the known and the unknown is dangerously thin. It is a region that demands respect, not just for its storms, but for the silence that follows them, a silence that has swallowed captains, crews, and passengers alike, leaving the rest of us to wander the shoreline, searching for answers in the mist. We close today with a question that lingers in the quiet of that bolted cabin on the OS McFarland. If you were standing in Captain Donner's shoes that night in April 1937, exhausted hearing the hum of the engines and locking your door against the cold, what do you believe truly happened in those 3 hours of darkness? Was it a physical escape we simply haven't discovered? Or did the triangle reach through the steel to claim its most enigmatic prize? Finally, before closing today's message, thank you for standing with me on this journey through the shadowed corridors of the Michigan Triangle. If you have your own stories or maritime mysteries to share, please leave them in the comments below. Your voice keeps these histories alive. If this exploration moved you, please like, share, and follow for our upcoming investigations. I look forward to seeing you in our next video.